there's a very powerful line from the Bhagavad Gita, which is to say that, look, there's no problem with contacting material objects. You want success? Let's talk about it. You want nice clothes? It could very well be within your realm, but be the ocean and contact all of the worldly objects like waves touch the shore and retreat into the ocean.
Hi, I'm your host Deepak, and this is A Little Bit of Happiness. Hi, Sandhya. Welcome to the podcast.
Deepak, lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
So nice of you to take the time, and I'm quite interested in your journey. So let's start with your background, Sandhya. You have a very interesting and diverse background. So where did it all get started and what led you to this point?
I presume I'm not going to start from my birth, so I'll skip a few years.
A few years, yes.
I'm joking. But I'll start by saying that part of my interesting background actually is what led me to the study of philosophy and Vedanta, which is that I feel like a lot of my drivers in my life were away from the things that I disliked and towards the things that looked interesting or shiny or new or something different from where I was. So it's in fact a very powerful metaphor from Hindu philosophy that the nature of the mind gravitates towards that which is shiny and is revulsed by that which seems effortful or difficult. So that could explain a lot of my early years and the movement. But of course, it did all come together quite nicely for me. As far as my study of philosophy itself is concerned, I will say again, much like my career journey, which moved from law to management to technology to retail, wellness, and then now as an executive life coach for several years, has been that it's been my search of feeling of belonging, finding a narrative that I could relate to. I was born by accident a Hindu, but somehow the sort of paths that I saw around me, I couldn't resonate with. I always felt like an imposter, an outsider, and I always had questions that were met with either shutting me down or derision or sometimes even outrage, like, how can you ask a question like that? And in my mind, the thought was always that, look, if I don't understand it, how can I follow it? And science was a great love of mine. And I somehow saw that, I thought that, look, if people have lived before us, and here I am going, flitting from one thing to another, going with what excites me. And the same thing that excited me 6 months, a year later, was the source of much of my tumult or anxiety or aggravation. And I said, look, there's got to be a smarter way. There have been millennia of humans that have lived before me. Somebody must have figured out a way in which we can find our answers, do things more intelligently, perhaps optimize all the things they don't teach you at school, and yet sort of do these 5 things and have a happy life wasn't appealing to me. And it was completely by chance, well, perhaps it was the quest that finally led me to the study of Advaita Vedanta. So that was one part of it. The other was that I was about to become a mother. This was, I'll say, 20 years ago. And I said, look, it's one thing living my life completely by accident, being tossed about from here and there. At least as a parent, I owe it to my children to not do that to them as well. Sort of pass on that suffering or pass on that all of that tumult. And so I said, man, I've got to find something that works for me. And there must be a path for people like me that ask questions, that want to work things out for themselves, that don't want to be just told that, do it because a particular guru or a god or somebody said so. And that's how I found Advaita Vedanta. And that was the beginning of my journey of questions, reflection, contemplation, I hope some digestion as well, and internalization and then application, because really change happens only when you start thinking differently and acting differently. So yes, that's been my journey of the last 20 years, at least, in a nutshell.
Fascinating, Sandhya. So I'm assuming from your answers, you came from a deeply religious family?
I actually came from a rather unusual family. Mm-hmm. We were sort of a bit of an NRI family. My dad was agnostic. My mum was a Hare Krishna in the manner of like the sort of international Hare Krishna movement, right? So, the stereotype of some Indians are more Indians than Indians, or some Hindus are, the NRI Hindus are more Hindu than the Indian Hindus. It really wasn't that. It was just that I honestly I love the idea. I'm Malayali by ancestry, so I would love the temples in Kerala, but I didn't understand what I was doing there, and it was more that I just wasn't getting my questions answered, and I was one of those who'd keep asking, but why, but why, but why, but why, but why, and really it was exhausting for people around me. So I don't blame them, but I think it was that mind that I'm grateful to my parents at least for not shutting me up, even if they didn't have the answers for it, that really led me to a body of study in which you are invited and welcome to ask, but why?
Sandhya, how did this journey into Advaita Vedanta start? I mean, who initiated you in that one?
Sure. So when I was pregnant and I went to live with my in-laws at the time, and in the temple near their house, there was a problem with my home in Bombay, and I had to suddenly evict it. So I was on maternity leave, and I was getting, what's the word, I'm cabin fever, sitting sitting at home, and I heard that my in-laws would go to the temple and they'd go attend these classes. Now I was a little sort of anxious, or not sure what to expect, but just I said, you know what, let me go with curiosity, see what these classes are about. Actually, maybe the teacher may have come home as well. And I had a conversation, and I felt like this was a person that did not come from that holier than thou mindset that we sometimes associate with religious leaders. And I felt like he was open and affable, and there was laughter. Many of my associations with some of the religious institutions was of seriousness, and the whole don't ask questions. So I think that the affinity to the teacher and the fact that he was welcoming of questions was really the first draw. And I had no idea really of how Hindu philosophy was even structured, and where Advaita Vedanta fit into the whole, I'll say, pyramid of Hindu philosophy. And so I started attending classes there with the Vedanta Cultural Foundation. I found out that they had classes all over the world, and I continued to attend classes wherever I was. And at some point, like I said, it's about internalizing. Sometimes it's about correlating with other teachers. So maybe 5 or 7 years ago, I also discovered the teaching of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk. And you start looking for patterns. You start looking for the patterns in Christianity, in Judaism, in Islam, Sufism. This became my study. And of course, because science was my great love, I started correlating it with how things happen in science, how you create a hypothesis, how you conduct experiments, you test it out, you come back to the drawing board, and what actually finds resonance between, from Advaita Vedanta to the world of science, and what you can use as a hypothesis. Even in the world of science, much of, I'll use the phrase quantum physics. I know it's one that's been much misused and bandied about of late, but in the physical world, in the world of physics, quantum physics is basically based on hypothesis, which not all of which is verifiable, but you can use the hypothesis to apply to very practical applications as well. Okay, so while you may not have been able to prove the absolute theorem, knowing that bits of it find application, the math of it does work. That's kind of how I saw Advaita Vedanta. Right. So have we experienced Brahman? We cannot say that for anybody else. That's one of the golden rules. Either you recognize that you are Brahman, or you work with it as a hypothesis and say, okay, assuming that I am Brahman, will I be able to verify XYZ in my life? And really, that's how I have been trying to live my life. And practicing, if somebody says, when I keep asking myself, am I there yet? The answer always is like, if the top of the pyramid is Tattvam Asi, that thou art, you are Brahman, then the next bottom line is Neti Neti. Am I there yet? The answer is not yet, or not this, not this. But really, for me, it's not yet, not yet. And I take that so strongly that I had it tattooed on myself. So the minute my ego gets attached to an idea that, ooh, I'm there, the answer will always be not this, not this.
Interesting. And so when did this journey of learning translate into your teaching? So when did you become a teacher?
I work as a coach. So I'll say this, part of how imposter syndrome works. And one would also assume that if one is on a path, one will overnight become self-realized or become, miraculously very wise. I can give you an example of one of my favorite academicians, Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for his prospect theory and his very famous book Thinking Fast and Slow. It's around cognitive biases. So one would assume that somebody's done Nobel Prize winning work around cognitive biases would not have any themselves. And I took great solace when an interviewer asked Daniel, so Daniel, you must, now that you've written so much about cognitive biases, you must be well beyond them. And he says, not in the least. Just because I've written about it doesn't mean that I'm able to apply it to my own life. So, and that was really the dilemma that I faced. I was like, I get it, I can see it, and yet I lose my temper. I know I should not get attached to this idea, and yet I find myself getting attached. So really, I felt that unless I have completely transcended, I should not open my mouth and, talk about it ever. But much of the work around imposter syndrome and behavioral science is calling it out, that, but also that you can be on the journey, and you can share your learnings, including your failures, and that can be lessons for others as well. So while in coaching we don't really teach, I do give talks in schools and colleges, I do give talks in the workplace, but around very specific topics around mindfulness, anxiety, but I use these principles. So what I call it is, I don't go necessarily with the label of Advaita Vedanta or behavioral science or a particular school or body of thought. My golden principle is first principles, that I should be able to use language that no matter what your belief system, no matter what your narrative, we should be able to find a common vocabulary and a syntax that really anybody should be able to verify, in bite-sized pieces. And you should be able to use that learning and apply it in your life immediately, not 50 years later and when things calm down or when you have become a jnani. The application of it is hopefully what takes you towards becoming a jnani or self-realized, or that's my hope.
So I know that the journey from knowing to doing is one of the key aspects of what you teach or coach about. But before we go to that part, Sandhya, how do you define the objective of all of this we are doing? Right. So there is an objective of becoming happier, becoming more peaceful, more calmer. But in all of that context, how do you define the objective as well as how do you define happiness?
I'll answer the first part separately from the second, because yes, I do know your podcast is about happiness, and it's a wonderful podcast. I will say that how I define objectives is I don't define the objectives. When I work with my clients, I always try and understand what their objective is, right? Because sometimes what looks like happiness for somebody could just be the easing of a little bit of the pain that they have lived with for 20 years. And that pain may be physical, that pain may be emotional, psychological, and just that shifting could be the most powerful part of their journey, right? It's like a slab of concrete that's lying on your back, and just being able to shift that. And if you tell a person who's sitting with a slab on their back that, "Bhai, you have to aspire for self-realization," they're not even going to get out of bed, because they're like, "Look, it's all very well for you to say that, but right now I can't even move." So it's always relative to where a person is, and really how change could happen in behavioral science is for your brain to really say that, okay, you know what? This sounds like something that I resonate with, for starters. And two, this sounds like something that I might succeed in. So even to say that I'm going to shift that concrete slab just a few inches so that it's not pressing down on my spine could be far more doable to somebody that's suffering a lot than to say to them, you deserve to be thriving, and the kingdom of heaven is within you. So that's the first part. The second part of happiness is, I'll really say that I do buy the ultimate Vedantic idea of happiness, which is the absence of craving. And I was the first person to object in my class for weeks and weeks on end that, look, this whole absence of craving sounds very boring. Then you'll have to stop wearing exciting clothes. You'll have to stop desiring things. And, that's why half of us think of, after retirement, that's when we will think about godliness. That's when we will reduce our cravings. And hopefully by then we will be happy. But I said, hold on a second. if this is a philosophy for living, why are we thinking about it when we're close to dying? Shouldn't there's got to be something that actually works for us right now? And some of it was really finding my own answers, because sometimes when you go with an established school of thought, what happens is that the teacher is only able to answer from within the teachings of that construct. Right. And I think it is the duty of every student to, like I said, to sit with this information, to contemplate on it, to digest it, to let it hook onto certain ideas that exist in your head, and perhaps go seek data as well elsewhere if you need to fill in the blanks. And so the way I explain the absence of craving is not necessarily the absence of wanting physical things. It's how we contact them. And in fact, there's a very powerful line from the Bhagavad Gita, which is to say that, look, there's no problem with contacting material objects. You want success? Let's talk about it. You want nice clothes? It could very well be within your realm. But be the ocean and contact all of the worldly objects like waves touch the shore and retreat into the ocean. Okay? Now, can you tell a person that is very attached to their, I don't know, Rolex watch, or to their job, or to their child, or to their partner, oh, this is all attachment, you should let it go, this is not the source of joy? Absolutely not. For them, it is a very real source of joy. And they are going to say, no, thank you. You may want some esoteric happiness, but right now, my job is a very real source of joy for me. Every achievement I get is actually makes me feel good. To which then you show curiosity, acceptance, non-judgment. But there is a path for that in Advaita Vedanta, which is that wherever you are, what you do is you aspire for a higher attachment. So if your attachment was physical, if all you loved was like stuff and I want more shoes, I want more car, I want more watches, we work with the client, and not necessarily using the language of Vedanta, is to show where there's deeper sources of happiness. The day that a child is playing with their car, or with their Barbie doll, or with their Lego bricks, the day that child discovers friendship, which is a deeper level of attachment, which is an esoteric, subtler level of attachment, you will be able to verify that the joy quotient in it is much higher. The potential for attachment is also higher, but the joy quotient is definitely higher. So the brain's getting excited. Oh my God, when I made that friend, even when that friend was physically away from me, I still seem to be having joy. Easy enough to verify. And the more time I spend in this friendship, I don't have to fight my attachment to my Barbie doll or my Lego. It automatically, I'm able to let go of that. I may have a fondness for it, but I become less attached to it. One day, I might even choose to give those Lego to my friend, to say, here's a gift for you, or give them away. And that's how we transcend our attachments, not necessarily to give up all of our worldly attachments or goods. So really, I do believe that happiness is the absence of craving. One of the examples I often give is that if you tell a person that's walking through the desert and they're so thirsty, what happens in that moment is that in the time that they're walking in the desert, all of our other cravings will recede to the background, at least temporarily, and we have one single craving left, which is that I want water. I want water more than anything else. In that moment that person finds an oasis or an abandoned bottle of water, and they find that bottle, I often ask, what do you feel? I mean, what do you think you'd feel in that moment? And it's usually some synonym of bliss, some synonym of happiness, dare I say the word. and that bliss does not come from having found the water. That bliss comes because in that moment, you want for nothing else. And once that is stayed, within 5 minutes, all your other cravings will come rushing back. But again, is it verifiable? Yes, it is verifiable. So how then can you now try reducing a few more of your desires, or transcending them rather? And do you find perhaps more bliss that way? And then we work towards, from physical to emotional to intellectual to whatever be your definition of spiritual, or something beyond even just ideas of identity, nationhood, money. If you think about all of these, their religion, they're all constructs that people like you and me came together and decided that this is where India ends and this is where the next country begins. This piece of paper is what we're going to decide is money. And and in the name of the intellectual, we have great attachment, we have great happiness. Somebody that's found intellectual happiness will very easily be able to say, oh, I don't care as much about my Lamborghini anymore, or whether I have Lamborghini or not doesn't really matter, because I'm so excited by my ideas. But that's also where your greatest attachment will lie. Some of the greatest devastation in the world has been in the defense of our intellectual ideas. The next level is our spiritual idea. Okay, relatively far more joy, deeper sense of joy. Oh my God, I have found God. Now I feel so blissed out. Yes, I may have wealth, I may not have wealth, but I feel far more equanimous than I ever did. The less rocks my world, but the potential for attachment is the greatest there. And arguably the greatest devastation in the history of mankind has happened in the name of religion. So we
Right.
don't stop there as well. Yeah.
So, so you covered a lot of topics there, right? The objectives are relative. Obviously, somebody who's suffering from hunger or some other suffering, you can't show them the ideal of Tattvamasi, right? That's not where they are. There is the theme of transcending your desires or your craving, right, to something which is in the Buddhist sense more wholesome, and between the wholesome and unwholesome emotions. So there's a lot to unpack there. But from the context of the absolute beginner, right, from the context of somebody in your clients, how do you divide your teaching, or how do you start this process of taking them to the next step, whether it be happiness or it be absence of craving or it be transcendence of craving? What are those initial first few steps that you take them towards?
So I think it's really again in the path. There are I didn't have to invent this process. This process already exists, which is that the first step is really to know yourself, right? To know what are the questions that have come up for you? Where does your suffering lie? I often say that things that hurt us, the circumstances or the people that create the greatest metabolic arousal in us, emotions in us, whether it be love, hate, happiness, jealousy, can tell us a lot about what's important to us. Okay, so the first step is analysis of the self. What am I like? What is my suffering? Where's my curiosity? Where does my solace? Where could my solace lie? And once we do that analysis, there is a path for each of us, and that path will often be divided between karma yoga. There are some things I will have to do. Bhakti yoga. It could be either faith, but it could also be surrender of expectation, surrender of the ego. Some part of it will be jnana yoga, which is, I think, so powerful because sometimes we often want a shortcut. Sit for 1 hour and meditate, and you will find all your answers. But you'll feel amazing in that hour of meditation because you're relatively craving free. Come out of that hour of meditation, nothing in your brain has really changed without any new inputs. We need to have our neurons fire differently. For that, we do need some fresh input as well, or some new way of doing things. So jnana yoga, very important as well. So I think the first step is always trying to understand where the person is really at, and to come in with that curious non-judgment, and to ask questions with curiosity and openness, which is actually the coaching way. So suits me just fine.
Right. So the first step is always looking inwards. But as you might have noticed, we are all used to looking outwards. So how do you get through that change of perspective, the 180-degree turn?
The way I say is, like if you and I were to watch a movie, Deepak, you would see very different things. I would see very different things. Okay. And I use the analogy, in childhood, we were always said, when you point the finger one way, look at the 3 fingers pointing back at you. Okay. So I literally will present a scenario, or I'll ask a client to present a scenario, and I'll ask them, what did you notice about that scenario? Okay. So very often, first the arrow will point towards, oh, that person hurts me, or I don't like the way he speaks, or I don't, I want my child to be something. And the 3 fingers that point back will be a lot about the I. I want my child. I don't like the way this person speaks to me. I wish for something to happen. So that's a great into the I again. So we take the external scenarios. We don't even know what comes to us. Sometimes I get a person on the verge of breakdown. Sometimes I get a person in the throes of anger. Sometimes I get a person who's perhaps over-relied on their hyperachiever. So we often are presented really with the result, with the world outside, as you have rightly said, and we work it backwards to what does that say about you?
Right. So, in my experience, Sandhya, so this process is usually a two-step process, right? So, we are down the hamster wheel and we are really running, and the mind is running, and we are looking at the finger which is there.
Mm-hmm.
And before we can look at the three fingers which are towards us, there has to be a pause, and there has to be a break. So, you're running in one direction, then it breaks, and then you run in the opposite direction. How do you coach clients? And you mentioned that some people are really in the throes of severe uh, trauma or anxiety, or really in very severe circumstances. So how do you move to them towards a pause into whatever is happening before they can move to the other three fingers?
The short answer is we cannot move anybody that doesn't want to move. Okay, so whether it's you can take a horse to water, you cannot make it drink, or some of Krishna's earliest lessons from the Bhagavad Gita, that most people are in a state of inertia. Those that are stationary will continue stationary. Those that are in a state of motion will continue until acted on by an external opposing force. Right? That's the definition of inertia. So I'll say two things have happened. One big thing is a 5-letter word, COVID. COVID really was that external opposing force that brought a lot of people to either a standstill or really gave them such a jhatka, gave them such a shake up that their old way of inertia movement or inertia stagnation was shaken up, and they were forced to ask themselves, what am I doing? What does my life look like? What are the next 40 years of my life going to look like? What's really important to me? Sometimes that can be that moment that creates that pause. But I was so pleasantly surprised to see that with a lot of professionals today, younger people, they're already asking themselves this question that, hold on a second, the hamster wheel that you described in behavioral science, we call it the hedonistic treadmill. That is there more to the hedonistic treadmill than just, one achievement after another? Yay, you've hit this milestone. Yay, you've hit this milestone. Guess what? There are 5,000 more milestones to go. There are a lot of people that are picking up on this pattern and saying, hold on a second, am I just being fed like sugar cubes and being drawn down like a rabbit hole or a rat maze? I got to be smarter than that about how I want to live my life. Or just the feeling of discomfort that some of this creates within us. People are so sensitive today and they have a vocabulary around naming this discomfort for themselves. Sometimes we're very quick to label it as, oh my God, this is toxic, or oh my God, I'm in anxiety. But that's a start, at least, to say that something doesn't feel right, and let me figure out a way. There's got to be a way to find this out. And today, discovery is easier than ever. And something like coaching is accessible is so much more democratic than it was 5 years ago, even, that very often that's just the first. Honestly, if you start to ask yourself some of these questions, only speech, like 80% of it you will get to. You may not even need a guru, a coach, or a guide or anything. The basic premise of some of the first principles of living is that sit with these ideas, look for the information where you need it, and you should be able to arrive at your truth by yourself that you can verify. You actually don't need somebody external to do this for you. But in our world of time scarcity, it's sometimes helpful to have somebody that will ask you the relevant questions. One, two, I'll quote one of my favorite quotes from possibly Einstein, who said that you cannot solve a problem with the same brain that caused it, right? If our own thinking patterns have created a particular narrative of ourselves and the world around us, it's very hard for us to turn the lens on ourselves with that same colored lenses. We'll be looking at ourselves with the same color. So it's sometimes helpful to have a neutral, non-judgmental voice simply coming in with curiosity to say, this is what I'm hearing. How is this sounding to you, the way I'm saying it from what you've been saying to me? And that's enough to spark thinking.
Right. So one of the other key themes which you mentioned a little bit earlier is the journey from knowing to doing.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the hurdles usually seen there, and what are the solution between these two aspects of living?
The hurdles could be many, but I will summarize it in a single statement that the brain puts brakes on us for very good reasons, actually. Right? We often think that our brain, we are here for like critical thinking. We are here to find the big answers. We're here to do great things in the world. Honestly, We are so much more animal than we would like to believe. Our brain's primary job is to keep ourselves alive and to keep ourselves in what our brain knows as our normal. So something as simple as I should be exercising I know it's a good thing, but my normal has been sitting in front of the laptop for 16 hours a day for 2 years of COVID. Now, if I tell my brain tomorrow morning I'm going to run 5 kilometers, your brain is going to say, I don't think so, my friend. I don't think I want to waste all this energy. You'll burn 300 calories all of a sudden. Then where will I go looking for all of these expensive calories to replace? And what if that puts you in a state of lack of safety? What if you have a deadline coming up in the office and you have no energy left for it? So we're not doing this really to self-sabotage. We need to understand that we need to understand what this chatter in our brain really sounds like. And this is where I find behavioral science has been so useful. Again, these are studies that have happened for decades and decades, and why not lean on them? We have research, we have evidence to understand how our brains work so much more than we did 200 years ago, 50 years ago even, right? So that translation is really to in a line, it would be to understand what is your brain trying to tell you about why it doesn't want to do it. Okay, could the problem be how we are framing the goal? Is the stretch too far from where we're at? I'll go back to what I said right at the beginning, which is that we have to get your brain a little excited. It's like that child playing with the toy. The child is to be slightly excited to say, this friendship looks interesting. I see other people having friends, or I see that this person looks kind and nice. And that way, the brain is slightly excited. The act of forming the friendship is effortful. Nothing happens without effort, but you can see that you have a reasonable chance of success at it because, this friend is just my next door neighbor, doesn't seem so scary to go across and just say hello. When you're able to frame it in this kind of language, we kind of do want to find, if you have that hypothesis that this could look like fun, I think I might succeed at it, we actually do tend to not want to self-sabotage as human beings, I've noticed.
Right. Moving forward, Sandhya, so again, coming back to you work with a lot of professionals, right? So you mentioned something about that. So obviously, there are various new dynamics in the new generation. There is social media, there is the hustle culture, and there is this fear of missing out, and all that stuff is building up. What common themes are you seeing these days, both in terms of the problems which people are facing as well as the solution set?
I'll say the big theme has been anxiety. And really, it's a broad label, largely to explain feelings of discomfort on a continuum of feeling of uncomfortableness down to like panic and actually freezing or fainting or several or very severe metabolic symptoms. But and much of the work around it seems to be how do we calm the anxiety? How do we cope with the anxiety? But the way I like to frame anxiety is that, look, anxiety is really your brain setting off a smoke alarm. It's telling you that something's not okay. Rather than just going and shutting off the smoke alarm, let's take a moment to just look to see what is your brain and your body trying to tell you. This is a beautiful metabolic arousal that's saying, hello, Sandhya, I think you need to pay attention to something here. So let's take a moment to see. The problem is we automatically assume that discomfort is either a tiger or it's nothing. All or nothing thinking, right? And nothing in between. And so if it's all tiger, then we go into full-blown anxiety attack or panic attack. And if we silence it, then we go into full avoidance mode. And somewhere that, if it's not a tiger, it could be just a termite, but it's going to eat away at us eventually. Right? So it's important to turn that smoke alarm off and actually address what these signals, cues that might be for us. And I think that's been the bulk of my work over the last 2-3 years at least. But besides that, really the idea that there's got to be a way to thrive, and that I get a lot of professionals that come from like the best colleges around the world even. Right. The beauty of COVID has been that geography really has become history. So I have clients from all over the world and go to the premier institutes. Very often our path in our life has been preset either by modeling from what seems aspirational from the world, or messaging that we've got in our families, or thinking that we had before our brains were even fully mature. It's really unfortunate that we ask children to make decisions about the rest of their lives when they are 15, 16, 17, or even 18, when the brain actually fully only matures in what we call late adolescence, that is in your mid to late 20s. And even then, we will often operate from the beliefs or the narratives that we've had since we were children. So who's to say that if at 40 you come to a pause and say, I'm wondering if I'm on the right path, or if I'm wondering if there's a better way to do things.
Hmm.
Is it not your prerogative that you should be able to pause, reflect, reorient, and set a new course for yourself? I'm so thrilled that people are coming, honestly, at every age. I have clients that I don't take anybody usually younger than 18, but I have a lot of early 20 something year olds. But I'm even more thrilled that I have 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-year olds that are saying, you know what? I want to know what the next 20 years of my life are going to look like. And I'm saying, welcome, let's look. Thriving is very much your birthright. Let's do this. So that beginner's mindset, that curiosity mindset, that feeling that there's got to be a better way to do things, that happiness, thriving is my birthright. That to me is really the reason that I get so excited to wake up every morning and spend time with the people that seek my help and choose to work with me.
That is so wonderful, Sandhya. And something you mentioned is that we do have this approach of all or nothing when it comes to anxiety or fear or right, all of these negative emotions that either it is we get swept away by them as if we have seen a tiger, or we just right, push them under the carpet.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the thing is these are the symptoms and there is some cause underlying. And it may not be a tiger, but it still may be something worth looking.
Absolutely, absolutely. And really, sometimes the fear of something can often be so much greater than the thing itself. So what might look like a dark cloud, when you actually shine a torch on it, and sometimes it does help to shine a torch with somebody loving, caring, non-judgmental, right? We are often braver in the company of another. When there's somebody saying, you know what, I've got your back, let's try looking at this together, you sometimes feel braver. And when you shine a light on that dark cloud, very often much of it is just that. It's just smoke and clouds. And what might actually be addressing might seem not so daunting after all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But Sandhya, in terms of practices,
Mhm.
is there any specific methodology you apply? Is it any specific branch of mindfulness or meditation which you usually give forth?
So I am an ICF certified coach. That means that we do follow the ICF protocols. And because I work largely in the corporate space internationally, we follow evidence-based practices. So we use cognitive behavior therapy. We use really the coaching protocols of powerful questioning, of active listening. But that apart, I often work with the belief system of the client, of the coachee themselves. I could use so for example, if I'm working with somebody from Pakistan and he happens to be Muslim, I could work with him with ideas of Western mindfulness or Buddhist meditation.
Hmm.
But he already has a practice in his life, which is to do namaz 5 times a day. Why would I not use what he already has to deepen the practice in a way that's meaningful to him, in a way that it wasn't for him before, to use that as the tool that he already has to transcend whatever he might be struggling with. Sometimes the thing that is right in front of our eyes we don't see, and we go looking for something far away, something more exciting. But the more familiar something is to us, the more readily available it could be as well.
Absolutely. Well, Sandhya, this has been a fascinating conversation. But before we end, is there any particular quotation, analogy, anecdote which you use frequently or which has stayed with you all through your journey, which you would like to share?
Oh my God, there are so many. Mm, let me see. I think one of the more powerful ones that I have, that I truly live by, is a quote by Lao Tzu, who says, "If you want peace in the world, first create peace between nations. If you want peace in a nation, create peace between cities. If you want peace in your city, create peace between neighbors. If you want peace with your neighbor, find peace in your family. And if you want peace in your family, find peace in your heart. So find your peace, find your happiness, and that's the way to create happiness in the world. It begins with you.
That's lovely. And that's actually something which we all need, at least looking at various issues facing the geopolitical world and everywhere, and especially COVID, right? So we've been through a pretty disastrous scenario and we are just on the other side. So there remains a micro and a macro perspective towards really living a good life.
Absolutely. That's literally how I work with people. Sometimes many of us get very caught up in our own heads, in which case it really does help to broaden the perspective a little bit. But for many people, especially like high achievers or the kind of people that I tend to work with, they are very focused on the externality, as you rightly observed, and really how much of the outside world can we control? How much agency can we create? We don't understand how powerful it can be to first start the work on ourselves. And that gives us a couple of things. Yes, we could be an influencer. Perhaps we will be able to, carry on very much longer when we are happy and calmer. But also, a couple of things will happen. When we are calmer, it's like the muddy pond. The sand will sediment and we get so much clarity. You'll be able to see so much farther when your own mind is clear. And very often the zeal that we have to fix other people can be a substitute for the lack that we feel within ourselves. So when we have that sense of wholesomeness within us, and it can just be the journey that we're on. If we're on the journey of our own self-healing, we can be such a tremendous source of strength and happiness to others. And we also know from behavioral science, when we are in the service of another, it's like us getting out of our own heads. It's like us stepping off our own hedonistic treadmill. It's like us in a game of badminton, perhaps, when our focus is on that shuttlecock, when our focus is on the other side of the court, that attention temporarily gets away from ourselves, our craving, our suffering. Guess what? The byproduct of that is happiness.
Perfect. And I think this is a good analogy to leave with, which is that if the water is muddy and swirling, you can't look further, right? But you have to calm it down, you have to make it clean. And then your sight goes much further. And whatever you plan out of life, which we started with in the Vedantic examples, you don't have to leave anything. You are in this life. But how far you can see and how far you can achieve, it depends on really how much clear the front is in front of you.
Absolutely.
Sandhya, this has been very fascinating. And thanks again for taking the time. It's been lovely hearing you and sharing your insights.
Thank you so much, Deepak. I had so much fun doing this. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot and take care.
You too. Bye.